Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the DeviceTalks Weekly podcast. It's great to have you here. We're going to look at the hospital at home movement by speaking with Leslie Trigg, the CEO of Outset Medical. Leslie is one of my favorite people in medtech. She and I worked on a conference a few years ago, and I always enjoy speaking with her. I particularly love the strong passion she has for medtech. She takes medtech very seriously, but she doesn't take her own self as seriously, and she has some humorous anecdotes in this interview. But I really wanted to drill down and explore Outset's creation of Tableau, which is a dialysis system that can be used at home. But the whole idea was to free up dialysis patients, in Leslie's words, to help restore their sense of self by freeing them of the schedules of dialysis clinics, letting them do dialysis when they can do it. This is a concept that we're seeing in other areas of medtech, again, with the whole hospital at home movement. So I wanted to talk with Leslie about what that involved for Outset and what it could mean for other sectors. And it was, again, a great conversation. Leslie has a lot of great observations on the space. But before we begin the interview, I wanted to let you know that registration for Device Talks Boston opens up on Tuesday, January 25th. So we'll have an early agenda up there. We've already got speakers up there. We have our advisors up there. And it will really be great to see you in Boston, May 10th and 11th at the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center. So go to DeviceTalks.com to register for Device Talks Boston. Now, let's begin this episode of the Device Talks Weekly podcast. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Chris Newmarker, you're back.
Newmarker is back in the house. Good to be here, Tom.
How are things on the home front?
Things are going well. We parents of young children like myself got a break in Minnesota. The state authorities lessened some quarantine rules, so that's good.
So you're gonna shove them out the door, huh?
No, I'm sending them to learn their ABCs and get a good education. I'm preparing them for life, Tom.
That's right.
Preparing them for life.
A lot of life lessons. They have to take over the Mass Device website someday, right?
There you go. Things they could aspire to, right?
So you and I are both on a tight schedule. So I think we'll just forego our usual delightful banter. Although I must let you know that someone did ask me this morning if your grill is out, if you're still grilling in the wintertime, or this came up earlier where someone suggested that you said you do not grill in the wintertime, and you took umbrage to that comment.
I mean, I would say right now it's 5 below outside as we're talking, so I am not grilling outside right now. I don't want to freeze to death while I grill. But there might be a few hardcore Minnesota listeners who are like, what do you mean? I was grilling out, some pork chops yesterday, but no, I'm not grilling right now.
We'll allow that. -5 is not the best grilling weather, but 5 is a great number for the top 5 stories of the week.
It's good pot roast weather, not
exactly.
Good grilling weather.
So let us move into the Newmarker's Newsmakers, your top 5 stories of this week.
Well, I got a surprise for you, Tom. I got a surprise. Number 5.
Yeah, just so people understand, you do send me the headlines prior to our calls, so I at least am aware of where we're going. But this week... You
mean you're not totally knowledgeable about every article I share with you before we talk about it?
I have the deepest understanding of the medtech. I just draw from years, decades of experiences. But no, you said on Slack, number 5 is a surprise. So I'm waiting.
Number 5 is another fun feature that we rolled out from our Big 100 project, from the end of last year. And this is a chart that we got posted up on medical design and outsourcing and mass device that lists the top R&D spenders in medtech, and not just by how much they spend, but by how much they spend as a percentage of revenue. So, just make a guess. Who do you think? Any guesses on who's near the top of the list for companies that spend as a percentage of revenue? These companies are spending a good portion of their revenue on, pouring that back into research.
So and is there a minimum size of company? I imagine there must be a revenue floor that you're least above this.
Yeah, I'd say the bottom of the Big 100 is oh gosh, 100 million or, a year. So, I mean, these aren't like tiny, like early small companies. I mean, like I'd like to make a few $1,000,000 a year, but I mean, for a company, that's a small company to make a few $1,000,000 a year, but
I'm because you're asking me that way. My head says Medtronic, but my heart is saying Edwards Life Sciences.
You know what? I mean, Medtronic, as far as like total spend, I mean, Medtronic is at the top of the list. Yeah. I mean, they spent nearly $2.5 billion on research in their most recent fiscal year. But yeah, when you talk about, when you look at all those largest spenders, the one that is spending the most as percentage of their revenue is Edwards.
Yoo-hoo!
That was really good, Tom. I mean, they're number 6 on the list for like, as like, spending by percentage of revenue, but I mean, they're there. I mean, they're number 9 by total spend. They're number 6 by like spend as percentage of revenue. I mean, they spend, their R&D spending is like more than 17.3% of their revenue. And, it seems to translate well for them. I mean, they're like arguably like they're definitely like the big player in the TAVR space. I mean, Medtronic's definitely been, grabbing market share in the US, but they're still like, I mean, Edwards is just like a dominant, company there. They're doing all kinds of other things with catheter delivered valves, all kinds of, and many other really neat things. So, I mean,
Very cool.
Edwards is right there.
All right.
Do you want to hear the rest, the top 5 that are above them?
I do. But before we do that, I want to remind kids out there who are listening, follow your heart. When your heart says something, go with your gut. Right. Trust the gut.
Go with the gut.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Remember that, kids.
Right.
What are some of the other noteworthy mentions on this most excellent list, and you'll have to tell people precisely where to find it.
Yeah, you can find this, right now, just right on MDO's Medical Design Outsourcing's homepage. I mean, it's these medtech companies care a lot about research, and the ones, and we got a whole list here with about 40 companies. So, I mean, this is a good list to really see like who's spending a lot on R&D as a percentage of revenue. We've got at the top Glaukos, which, I mean, they're doing a lot of neat things with stents in the eyes. NovoCure, Inspire Medical Systems is number 3. They've got some implantable neuromod tech for treating sleep apnea. We got AtriCure number 4, and we got Dexcom at a number 5. Which that's one of the big product launches we're expecting this year is the G7 CGM out of Dexcom. So they've been
that's a great list.
Yeah,
we'll have Tim Herbert, the CEO of Inspire, at DeviceTalks Minnesota. And we'll have Dexcom on an upcoming DeviceTalks Weekly.
I was just earlier today reading a Star Tribune Minneapolis story about how Inspire's revenue doubled in the past year. So, I mean, definitely a hot company around the Twin Cities here.
Well, I think the Philips recall probably gave that a little boost. What do you think? A little juice?
I want to be surprised. I mean, we have one of the largest respiratory device makers having just this big awful recall. Like might have gone some people saying like, hey, maybe I'll just get this pacemaker like device they can get this treated for me. So that is interesting.
Definitely an appealing option as opposed to having the CPAP machine, though. ResMed's doing very excellent selling their devices.
Just talking about these like pacemaker like devices that like gently zap things in your body. I mean, number 4 on our list is Medtronic. They were, touting new 3-month data on, about how like their DTM spinal cord stimulation therapy could provide meaningful pain relief, from that spinal cord stimulation. So like this is, therapy for back or leg pain. So that's just another example of of this kind of like implantable neurostim, some news on that front as well. So
that was a professional segue right there, Chris Newmarker. Moving from
thank you. I learned from the best, Tom.
My goodness. I'm like, oh my God, that was seamless. I was just watching it swish through the hoop, and that was very impressive. So I didn't even get to say
nothing but net.
I didn't get to scream out the number. So now we'll say number 3. What's number 3 in the Newmarker's Newsmakers?
3 on the list. Okay, so number 3 on the list. Actually, this is some more neurostim news. Actually, I got to have done another little segue here. We got Neurometrix winning an FDA breakthrough designation for their Quell device to treat certain chemo side effects. So, some interesting news. I mean, this is an implantable, of course. I mean, the Quell device is, something that it works on the outside for pain relief. But I mean, gosh, unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there. Cancer is a big, terrible disease, and there are a lot of people, that need chemo, and if they move, forward, with regulators on this, this could be a big new market for their device.
That's fantastic. No, you're right. We talk so much about COVID, we forget about there's no shortage of other horrible situations, horrible diseases out there. So it's great that they got the FDA breakthrough designation. All right,
absolutely.
Let us move on to number 2.
Yeah, some really interesting news from Augmedics. They're bringing in the former CEO of Barty DX, Kevin Hykes, as their new CEO. So really neat hire.
That is a great hire, and Kevin Hykes is a really good guy. He worked as a co-chair at a MedTech conference that I did in Minneapolis for a couple of years, and super nice man. Has had some great success leading companies. So this is a terrific hire for Augmedics.
Yeah, and just for people who don't know a lot about this Chicago-based company, they've got their FDA-cleared X-Vision spine system, which provides augmented reality guidance. So interesting technology. Bringing on somebody really notable, in the medtech scene as their new CEO, and we need to follow where things go with them.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let us roll to number 1. I know we both have a hard stop. So what is number 1 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers list? Number 1 on the list, this is a little, more bad news. Where there was a word out of Acutus Medical. They announced that they're undertaking a corporate restructuring that includes layoffs, and they didn't disclose to us how many people they're letting go, but it was subject to WARN Act. That means that involves more than 50 people, but their CEO was saying that they've undertaken a detailed review of strategic priorities, and this is they're kind of doing some stuff to streamline the operation and ensure that they've got some good fiscal health going forward. Their CEO is talking about strengthening the company's foundation. So some. It's a tough one. You hear about some people being laid off, but it comes at an interesting time, though, with Medtronic paying close to $1 million, or actually over $1 million, for Affera, the cardiac arrhythmia mapping company out in the Boston area.
Right.
And between their Medtronic's pulse field ablation, Boston Scientific, of course, acquired Farapulse, which was founded by Steve Mickelson, who is now CTO at Acutus. So it's a space that's heating up, and it's interesting to see Acutus taking these steps at this time. I don't know how it'll ultimately play out.
Yeah, I mean, they just did an IPO two years ago, so they. But that's another thing. You're a publicly traded company, and sometimes the markets. That's something that the markets like to see out of a publicly traded company is like, oh, we're looking at our spending or whatnot. So
definitely a lot more scrutiny. All right, great list, Chris Newmarker.
Thanks. I try. There's a lot of news. It's just amazing. Like in these times, there's just so much news turning through Mass Device right now with the industry.
It's not slowing down anytime. Leslie Trigg, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
I was listening to the episode we recorded back in October, I think 1900. No, actually it was 2020, but it felt like so long ago. Little Tom, Leslie talking about things such a different period in time. But here we are. We're now January 2022, and I'm excited to catch up about Outset's progress. We have a lot to talk about. But in listening to that previous episode, I realized I hadn't asked you what I asked most people, which was about your path into the medtech industry. What drew you into medtech initially?
Well, what drew me into medtech was that nobody wanted to hire me in biotech. It was, let's say, a path of necessity. No, all kidding aside. So after I graduated from undergrad, I worked for kind of a PR lobbying firm in Washington. And I had a client, I was assigned a client that at the time had devised, actually sort of coming full circle, interestingly, it was something for the home. It was the first home test for HIV. And that probably most immediately piqued my interest in just healthcare broadly, but went to business school. And then fast forward, it was my heart's desire to work at the Genentechs of the world, Chiron at that time. Biotech was really, in some ways, still in its infancy compared to where it is today, but a very, very hot field. And frankly, I just couldn't get a second interview. I got first interviews probably because they were just on campus in general, but I never got second interviews. And I was just not that competitive with a liberal arts undergrad. I spoke in words, not molecules. But in any event, a friend of a friend, complete serendipity, said, hey, I know this guy who works at this company, Guidant. What's that? I think it's something with like medical devices or like something equipment. So that was good enough for me. And at that point, I was very open-minded about getting a job, period. I, at one point, by the way, had also interviewed with a wheelchair company and was also not invited back for a second interview. So that'll give you some sense of things.
This is going to be an inspirational podcast for people out there. Look at her now, folks. A high-powered CEO of a publicly traded medical device company.
By a wheelchair company. Sadly, very, very true.
So Guidant is a nice consolation prize joining that company. This was at a time in the same era I started covering this industry. And you're right, it was a time actually when people would conflate medtech and biotech. Like medtech was like a subset of biotech. It's like, biotech, they do all this different kind of stuff. So we definitely have different identities now. Talk a bit about Guidant. I always jokingly try to get people to badmouth their Guidant experience, and I've been unsuccessful so far, and maybe I'm unsuccessful because I always set it up with that question that way. But what was your experience in Guidant like, assuming you enjoyed yourself? And if you did, what made it a special company?
That's really interesting that you've never talked with anybody. I'm sure you've talked to many people from Guidant because it was really a prolific talent machine. It's really interesting that you've never talked with anybody who had anything bad to say about it. And I won't do anything. I won't be able to break your streak. I really, and it's not the way you set up the question. I mean, I really did have a phenomenal experience there. And that starts with Ginger Graham. I remember so distinctly the first kind of all company meeting that I sat in on. Again, I was like a super lowly product manager, right? Like months out of business school, didn't know anything about healthcare, med tech, anything. But I remember just being instantly, really, I was marveling at her ability to kind of fly at many altitudes, knowing the names of, it seemed to me like every single assembler on the manufacturing floor, to being able to articulate strategy and listening to her earnings calls and being able to cover the gamut of many, many different products at many different stages of clinical and commercial development. And I just thought that was amazing and something that I wanted to try to achieve in my career. Mm-hmm. And so it starts with Ginger, but every single individual I worked with at Guidant, number one, I remember truly cared, absolutely wanted to do the right thing, which isn't to say that the company didn't make mistakes or that the wrong thing was done sometimes, but really wanting to do the right thing, wanting to do things well, and having an ambition around where the company was headed over the next couple of years, which was always very articulated very well. And I think that the leadership there kind of led from the place of why before what. Those are some of my observations.
And just if you would just kind of walk me through your time after Guidant in MedTech. I mean, what were some of the high points that sort of got you to where you are today? You don't have to go through every stop, but what were 2 or 3 high points?
Well, I was very, very happy and fulfilled at Guidant. I'd only been there about 2 years, but somebody at Guidant had moved over to a startup in the breast cancer diagnostic space that had actually a company that had been founded by, at the time, a very, very well-known, I'd say famous breast surgeon, Dr. Susan Love. She'd written many books. She was on GMA and the whole bit. So that is what really lured me over to and out of big companies and into the startup landscape. What I immediately embraced and loved and then couldn't live without in the startup environment was the chance to play every position on the court. Not every day, but you just the exposure. I think that for people starting in med tech, a bigger company is a wonderful place to start. You learn what good looks like at scale. After a big company, though, of course, I will be the biggest proponent ever of the startup, because you can sit around tables that are not siloed, because they're not operating at scale and don't necessarily have the structure, which is a great and very necessary thing. But in terms of individual development, and this was certainly my experience, the ability and the requirement to think about a problem or a question multidimensionally was a very unique attribute of working in a startup. So that was my first experience in a startup. And from there, got recruited to a company called Fox Hollow that was in its infancy. I think there were maybe 30 people. They were focused on coronary, not peripheral. I mean, it was very, very early that company, we were able to create a lot of value in that through an IPO and then its eventual exit through the sale to EV3. I had then had an opportunity to go work with Fred Khajravi at Access Closure, and he is what drew me to that opportunity. I did not, to be honest, have a particular passion for closure devices, didn't really know much about the closure space. I did know that it was fairly stale, that it had been relegated to kind of a commodity status in the cath lab. No cardiologists walked around asking one another, what closure device do you use? And so that I think the combination of Fred, the opportunity to work with somebody who had been such a successful and prolific kind of inventor and leader was the big draw. And then secondarily, the intellectual challenge in my head, at least, which was, is it possible to elevate a product out of commodity status and assign it a premium for some reason that you invent? That's what we did there at Access Closure. And then that was ultimately acquired by Cardinal. And then that sort of led me on to Lutonix, again, very drawn to that opportunity by the CEO and the founder, Dr. Dennis Warr, another cardiologist, and loved the opportunity to be working with him and his team. I was really drawn to that one, though, when I heard drug-coated balloon for the legs. It's so self-evident. It was so obvious to me that was going to have a role, whether it was the defining role or a guest starring role in the cath lab. I thought that one seemed very obviously big. When we sold that company to Bard, I got involved with Warburg Pincus. They had been an investor in Lutonix and had said, hey, why don't you work for us for a little while and help us with the portfolio companies in healthcare that we already have. Silk Road Medical was one of them. So had an opportunity to work on Silk Road early on, one opportunity in the stroke space, which unfortunately did not translate into success. And then there was this company called HD Plus at the time, Home Dialysis Plus now called.
I want to get into the state of Outset, but just looking at the companies you listed, Fox Hollow, Access, Lutonix, all acquired, successful outcomes. But how do you look back at those experiences and the fact that they ended in an acquisition? Is it something that you're proud of it, but did you see it as a positive end to that story? Do you sometimes wish you could have taken the idea farther looking back? I mean, it is what it is, but I'm just curious how you look at those acquisitions.
That's a great question that I have not contemplated, hence the pause and the stalling for time. I think that, and I don't mean this to sound dismissive at all. I think that in each of those cases, the technology that was developed and commercialized was better for and made stronger by the companies that acquired it and the other technologies in that company's bag. To me, those were all devices that were meaningful steps forward and were best when complemented by other devices in the cath lab. I don't know if that's true for orthopedics or neuro, or I've never been in those spaces. I think in cardiology, though, there is so much leverage and amplifying power by being able to present kind of an ecosystem of devices that work well together, that if I were entering or on the board of a company in the cardiology space, that would probably be my natural bias.
They reached their most logical destination. They got to where they needed to go, basically, to be successful.
I think so.
Yeah, good point. So let's talk about Outset. When we spoke last, you'd just gone public. We talked about the Zoom roadshow and the pros and cons of that and how you came to peace with being denied sort of the actual experience of having a roadshow, which sounds horrible anyway, but traveling around and selling the company sounds like a rough experience. But so what has life been like since the IPO? Talk about your experience as the CEO of a publicly traded company.
Well, we've been public now for a little over, I suppose, 18 months. So I've had some time to experience and reflect on that question. One observation I have about migrating from private to public is that I think it is very easy to fall into the practice of playing defense. It feels more comfortable because I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, the risk feels higher. It feels a lot higher because the company suddenly, any company, not just Outset, is more visible. And so it feels like losses are going to get magnified for risks taken and untranslated. On the other hand, I think playing defense, while more comfortable in the moment because it's perceived as lower risk, is the ultimate risk. Falling into that trap is what is ultimately, in a self-fulfilling way, going to create more risk down the road. So trying to be mindful of that. I think we are at a place as a public company now that we're thinking bigger. We are thinking even bigger. We've never been a company that's thought small, but I think we're in a mode of, we're in a hyper expansion mode. We're in hyper growth mode. We're in hyper kind of offense mode. And that is not just commercially. I think that's across the company, thinking bigger, from policy and advocacy in Washington to supply chain, to challenges with nursing shortages, to what does next generation manufacturing look like. So I would say that's one difference being public is it has emboldened me. I think it's emboldened us. That's maybe one thought. I guess another thought, though, is on the other hand, another difference is a premium put on consistency and predictability. I think every CEO or management team, private or public, of course, wants to generate results that are predictable and consistent, but the stakes do feel higher for sure, because we're making public promises to shareholders that we intend to keep. And I think that's been our calling card, right? So I think consistency and predictability for us, at least, are now absolutely paramount. And we intend to be known for that. And so how do you get there? I would say, compared to when we were private, we have become meticulous planners and very, very data-driven, probably much less emotion and gut instinct in our decision-making today as compared to, privately a couple of years ago, which doesn't make it better. It's just different because we are really serious about delivering on the promises that we make to shareholders, in addition to patients and providers. And then lastly, maybe another difference, and this is still a story that's unfolding, I would say that as a public company, it probably has enhanced our credibility with customers, and perhaps given customers, whether said or unsaid, even greater assurance that we are going to deliver. We are well capitalized. We have had the cash to continue to grow our executive team, to grow our teams in general. We almost doubled the size of the company just last year in the middle of the pandemic. So we're resourced now to really deliver on the promises that we're making to customers. And I think there's an element of, okay, this is a public company, et cetera, that probably is a little different and advantages us today compared to when we were private commercially.
I want to get into your story about your origins as to with the notion or the objective of bringing dialysis to the home, and how it's sort of synced up with the conversation of the day due to COVID and other stresses on the healthcare industry. But just staying with public markets for 1 second, and you can answer this question or not, it's up to you. But I read this morning about SPACs and about the troubles they're having. The year after we talked, a number of medtech companies went public via SPACs. Do you have any thoughts as to whether you would have considered that route if you hadn't gone public the good old-fashioned way? Any thoughts on the contrast between going public the way you did and going public via a SPAC?
Well, I'll give a disclaimer right away, is that I am on the board of a SPAC.
Oh, okay.
Run by one of our long-term investors in a group that I think very highly of. So I want to put that out there so this doesn't come across in any way to be sort of biased or self-serving. Mm-hmm. So your first question, would we have considered it? We did consider it. SPACs were very much on the table and out there in the world when we were thinking about raising money through the public markets. I think that, I'll give you a middle of the road answer because it's what I really believe. I think SPACs absolutely can be a very good answer for a whole variety of reasons. And I think actually serving on the board of this particular SPAC has opened my eyes to that. I think you can get into transactions that are much more creative, or I'd sort of say bespoke to the company's needs. For us, I think our path was the right one because we knew in what we're trying to do, it's so capital intensive that I felt that it was really going to take a village and a highly diversified and very large investor base. And that's not impossible. It's just sometimes a little bit slower to sort of build that type of support around the company through a SPAC process versus a conventional IPO. What I've learned is there's no one size fits all right answer, which is great. Just in the same way that there's no one way to finance a company privately, that's the right way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great points. So let's focus now on your company. Take a moment just to kind of give us the quick overview of Outset's mission and Tableau's role in improving dialysis for patients? Where are you able to help? What is your product able to do?
Sure. Happy to do that. So our sort of reason for being is to reduce the cost and complexity of dialysis for the provider while radically elevating the care experience for the patient. Why that's important, a couple of reasons it's important. Number one, dialysis is a big problem getting bigger. It is fueled by hypertension, diabetes, and obesity. And those are sort of three trend lines that we know are continuing to go up and to the right. As a result of that, just in the United States alone, there are well over 550,000 people on dialysis. And that number is many times bigger around the world. When patients have to go on dialysis, and this is chronic dialysis for the rest of your life, it is not optional. You are going to go to dialysis 3 times a week for a couple of hours each time, COVID or no COVID, economic downturn or no downturn, whatever's going on in the world, you're still going to go to dialysis. It is life-sustaining. And the environment in which we entered and got started in this now, 10 years ago, was one that was not at all hospitable to new technology. In fact, there really hadn't been a new device for something like home dialysis, let's say, in over 15 years when we eventually got approval for home. And it was kind of a landscape of these like mini equipment monopolies and a very static service model that also hadn't changed. I mean, most patients are told you're going to show up on these days at this time, you're going to sit in this chair and be served by this person, kind of whether you like it or whether it's convenient for you or not. And so the moral imperative of the company, and we certainly have a financial imperative and promises, as I said earlier, that we make to shareholders to earn the right to deliver on the moral imperative is this, which ultimately is to deliver choice and convenience to, I'll say the consumer, to any of us who find ourselves or our relatives needing dialysis for the rest of their life. And the reason why I think choice and control and flexibility is so vital is I think that it's fundamental to sort of personal liberty, identity, and self-worth. We control every element of our day. Most elements, most decisions, we're in charge. But when you start on dialysis, much of that choice and personal autonomy is taken from you. And what I've experienced talking to many, many, many people on dialysis is that it really starts to erode at their very sense of self. When those individuals have been able to take the opportunity to be back in control, which is at the home, you decide, you're back in the driver's seat, what days you're going to dialyze, what times are convenient for you. It enables people to go back to work. The unemployment rate, or I should say the employment rate in the dialysis population at large is 19%. That's not because everybody's over the age of 80. It's because you're told this is when the clinic has availability for you. And if that's 1:00 in the afternoon, that may not be consistent with your ability to stay employed. So again, being back at home, you can dialyze at 5 a.m. or 10 p.m. or 7 p.m., whenever you want. But I think more important than schedule flexibility is sort of this to me, a fundamental human right to, as I said, liberty and a fundamental sense of identity and self-worth that we don't realize is actually really very much tied to our ability to make decisions for ourselves.
That's amazing. No, in reading one of the stories on your website, the gentleman said that I think it was 3 times a week, 5 hours a day that he would have to go and get it. And it was like, he called it a part-time job. Mm-hmm. And that really resonated. And it kind of sounds like and feels like almost a diabetes community where someone is called upon to make 300 decisions a day to monitor their lives. They lost control of a big part of their lives. So it sounds like a very similar sort of thread with dialysis.
You know, you make a great point with diabetes, because that analogy came to mind for me very quickly, just looking at dialysis before I knew much about it was, well, how is this so much further behind diabetes? Because patients who do have type 1 or type 2, they're completely enabled by technology. And that's technology that continues to get better and better and better and better every single year. That's been missing from dialysis. Number 2, they're at home. And I don't know everything there is to know about the history of diabetes management, but there was a time when patients would go into these diabetes clinics, right? And those still exist, but those clinics today are all aimed at allowing patients to just manage diabetes in their home as something that's just a part of their life, not ruling their life. And that felt really different to me than what was going on in dialysis. And so I think diabetes actually has really served as a North Star to me as what's possible. I know these things are possible because service providers paired up and partnered with technology providers have created and made that so. And we can do the same thing in dialysis.
That's terrific. I was intrigued by the stage you set when you said that there were these forces already in dialysis that sort of made entry difficult for new players. As someone entering this field, what drove you? Was it, we have this great technology, we must push it forward? Is it the moral imperative that you sort of mentioned earlier? I mean, certainly financial comes into it to a degree, that everything does when you're starting a company. But what do you tell to yourself that convinces you that you're going to change this ecosystem and sort of run through these forces that may be trying to keep you out?
I would say it's not just one thing, of course, as it never is in life. As I reflect, listening to your question and reflecting back, I think it was a combination of naivete. Let's be honest. I really had no idea what I was up against. I can tell you about all these forces now in great detail because I've been in the space for 10 years, but so did not know what I know today. But so a healthy dose of naivete and a healthier dose of anger. I just was pissed. And I started getting pissed really the first time that I had the opportunity to visit with someone. He was a Vietnam vet. He was living in a mobile home in San Jose. And one of our early medical advisors had enabled me to connect with him. And I was able to watch him set up this one home device, the only one that had ever been approved. And it just really pissed me off because it was needlessly complex. It was needlessly burdensome. And I think coming out of the cardiology space and, companies like Guide and others, I knew how fast, diabetes, another one, I knew how fast the technology was changing and being improved for the consumers and the patients that it served. And why is that not happening here? Like, we are making people's lives needlessly onerous. So that's kind of where the anger came from. And then I would say probably the third element for me, and if my parents ever listen to this, they'll probably laugh. Like, I did spend much of my high school years grounded. So I don't love being told not to do something. And so when early on these impediments, some of the, I'll just call it the attitudes from some of the incumbents started piling up, and it started to feel more and more like, that is so cute that you guys are going to try to do this, and you will just see how that goes for you. So that tends to inspire and motivate me. So probably some combination of those three things.
Oh, that is a great answer. So let's go back to when you joined Outset. What was your mission then? And is it different than the one you have now? Has this idea evolved over these years?
The idea around Outset and our device Tableau has evolved quite a bit over the years. And I really credit the team of people that have dedicated their kind of brain power to this effort. None of this inspiration around how it evolved was mine. So I want to be clear about that. We originally started, as our company name, Home Dialysis Plus, would indicate, with a single-minded focus around home. And I hired a leader early on who had come from Intuitive Surgical, Jamie Lewis, and she grasped on immediately to, I wonder if there's any problems to be solved in the inpatient setting that Tableau would be able to solve. And I said, I have no idea. I don't have time for that. Like, if you're passionate about that, go for it. And she was like a dog with a bone on this thing, and just researched and researched and researched. And so it turns out that she was really onto something. And so that was, I would say, kind of the first evolution of Outset was, oh, wow, we've developed a solution here that can solve more than one problem. And it turned out that hospitals were really wrestling with a couple of different problems all around cost and complexity, the operational workflows and efficiency or lack thereof of doing inpatient dialysis. And Tableau was like an ace in the hole because it was super, super easy to use, which meant it was really fast to learn, which meant that the hospitals, could use their own nurses and dialysis nurses to deliver the care directly, which meant that the cost of doing so went down quite a bit. And so that was the first evolution, was we got really focused on acute. And in fact, today, the majority of our revenue is still generated from health systems. Tableau is being used by a majority of the largest national health systems in the country, many of the biggest regional health systems. So we are very proud of that expansion. I would say the second evolution of the company then became, well, it's bigger than that. Okay, so it's bigger than home, it's bigger than hospital. And this was an inspiration. I'll never forget one of our current VPs of sales, Ronnie Eason. He was interviewing with Outset, and I had an opportunity to talk with him. And he said, you know what Tablo really is? He goes, it's like an enterprise solution for dialysis. And hence the enterprise solution was born. And that was really, I credit Ronnie with kind of the second evolution of the company, because it's not just acute. The same hardware platform can be used in the ICU, bedside on the floor, in a skilled nursing home, in a rehab or LTAC, or at home, and anywhere in between. And then that really tied it all together in the idea of one hardware, one device, many modalities. And so I would say that's where we are today. And then in the spring of 2020, right as the pandemic was kicking off, the final piece of the puzzle dropped in, which was FDA clearance for home.
So what does Outset and Tablo look like going forward? What are you projecting will be the larger part of your business 5 years from now? Is it going to be home? Is it going to be in hospital, in a clinical setting?
I don't think we forecast one to be that much bigger than another. I think you'd ask me that over 10 years, and frankly, I'd be guessing over 10 years. But I think what we've consistently conveyed to investors or potential investors is that acute certainly is kind of wave one of growth, right? We started there earlier. So we've got a couple of years of getting the flywheel going. And so that's kind of wave one. And then home is really this whole second wave of growth. And so as I think ahead 5 years, I would say they probably are neck and neck actually for revenue contribution to this company. So and we still have a very long runway in the acute space. I mean, there's several thousand hospitals that deliver dialysis. So we're really just getting going there.
Interesting. So we're seeing on a broader scale the movement of bringing the hospital to home for a variety of reasons. I think it was already moving in that direction before the pandemic, but the pandemic has certainly opened up an opportunity or a need to have more services done at home. You're in a unique position where you were already doing that. I wonder, what is the difference between selling in a clinical space and selling an at-home product? And what sort of broader lessons do you think others who want to create a device that delivers a service at home could draw from Outset's story?
Well, home is still very much a new frontier for us. So I want to say this or answer this question with all due humility. We are just in the beginning of our journey there for sure. Last year really was our first full year of commercialization. And so the approach we took, number one, was sort of go fast to go slow, or go slow to go fast. That would not be what we want to do. But yeah, this idea and drawing back to, you asked me a little bit about my background leading up to Outset. This philosophy I have is certainly informed by some of the other, I'll just say, commercial efforts that I have led, and I'll take ownership over this, where it's been like 3, 2, 1 blast off. And I think what I've learned from those experiences is you really learn a lot much later than you think you're still going to be learning. So I think carrying that forward and then being particularly cognizant of the responsibility that look, we're in somebody's house and there's kids there and there's cats and dogs and family members and things that are very personal and that people really care a lot about. The combination of those two, I think, led us to the conclusion that year one had to be really about like, let's get it right. Whereas in the acute setting, for sure, I mean, we wanted to refine the model and get it really right. I would say we took getting it right. It's kind of like on steroids, I guess, in the home for all the reasons that I think makes sense. So that's one observation or one comment on our philosophy. I would say maybe the second one in what's different about the home versus the acute is in the home setting and supporting patients. I mean, yes, of course it's about the device and the technology, but it's about so much more. We have to be great at delivering an experience. And so, yes, we want to deliver a great experience in the acute, but experience is more defined in a more limited fashion, whereas in home, experience we define very broadly. And so we thought early on, like, we have to be exceptional at so much more than the device. And we have to be controlling details that frankly are out of our control. The delivery of supplies into the home. Was it on time? Did they get a heads up text or email or phone call? Were any of the boxes broken? Were they all delivered across the threshold to the place in the home that the person wants them delivered? Was the person nice? What were they wearing? We really go deep on these details and really bake them into our service level agreements with our partners, our customer experience team. That's really a conversation, whereas on the acute side, you're going to get a purchase order or, you're going to get, hey, calling up, we need 1,000 more cartridges or whatever. That's very transactional. In the home, the home is not transactional for us. We view the home as a relationship, and a relationship needs not only a good start, but it needs attending over time. It's the care and the feeding and the expansion of that relationship over time that we really care about, and we think we need to be good at.
Are people like myself sort of overstating this move of hospital into the home? And I'm not sure if I'm even getting the terminology right, but is it something that is happening, that will happen, or is it harder than it looks and there aren't a lot of medical device companies with the products, the expertise, or the capabilities to really execute on that objective?
I cannot speak to whether all aspects of hospital to home are too difficult, in the home. Is every device compatible with home use? I don't know. But what I can tell you is, like you, I have actually watched with great interest and actually hope that all of this investment that's been poured into hospital to home on the services side will translate to a much more rewarding experience for people like us who probably would prefer to stay at home and will have a shorter path to recovery if we do. So I am very, very hopeful. I'm bullish on it because I think so much capital has been poured into it. And knowing many of these hospital to home service providers, there's not only a lot of smart money, there's a lot of smart talent. So yes, I believe that will not only persist, but expand and grow. And in that sense, yeah, that becomes a tailwind for home dialysis. But beyond that tailwind, we have, I think, the rise and proliferation of telehealth is really a door opener and expander for patients dialyzing at home if they don't have to, because patients on home dialysis right now, they have to go back to the clinic once a month. Well, if you're living 2 hours away from the clinic, that's not super convenient. So I think now, and it is under EUA, and we'll see if that endures, and we certainly hope it will. But I think that will really enable more patients to stay at home through telehealth. And then, and technology. We now have a remote monitoring capability on Tableau where the clinical provider can monitor that patient's treatment at the home before, during, and after treatment. So I think the combination of technology and sort of the acumen of these service providers. And then lastly, I would say the financial incentives, at least with regard to home dialysis, we now have some new financial incentives for providers that we've never had before that are acting as a tertiary tailwind.
That's a great point. I hadn't really considered the payment factor, but that clearly has to fall into place. So that's great thoughts on that movement. Let's focus lastly on some changes you've had at Outset. You have a new CFO and you brought in an executive from Amazon to work on your IA capabilities. Talk about your new executives and what that means for the company going forward.
We have had the opportunity to bring on some incremental firepower at the leadership level. And going back to your earlier question, the differences between being private and public, this is probably a great example of the advantages of being public and just having access to more capital to be making investments that are on the offense. We are in hyper growth mode and we're in, sort of ambitious mode. And that requires us to have both the vision for what we want to be in the next evolution, but also the ability to scale the organization. And that's really fundamental to kind of our vital few on an annual basis is operational excellence and scale. And so some of the additions to the leadership team, all of them actually, were really in the spirit of serving that purpose. So we brought on Steve Williamson as our Chief Commercial Officer. He was running an enormous worldwide business for Becton Dickinson. Prior to that, C.R. Bard. He has both, I think, vision and scale and leadership. I mean, as we get bigger and now, it's not dozens of employees, it's hundreds, and we operate in Mexico. We also operate in the US and over time have ambitions to expand internationally, really needing all the leadership or horsepower that we can assemble around the table is really key. We did hire somebody from AWS Health AI, and we are making, pretty significant investments, already have before, but now how do we kind of take our data analytics just to the next level and really focus more on sort of clinical insight generation? Dialyzing somebody even 3 times a week gives you access to their circulatory system for 12 to 14 to 15 hours a day. There is a tremendous amount of clinical learning that can be pulled out of that kind of physiologic, biologic access that we haven't even scratched the surface of. So we're pretty interested in that. And then lastly, we were able to introduce a new Chief Financial Officer, Nabil Ahmed, who had been with our organization for a year prior. I always describe Nabil as kind of an oxymoron. in the sense that the best description of him is actually as a very funny CFO. He has the distinction of being funny and smart and wise, kind of all wrapped up into one. But I feel lucky that we've been able to, even through a pandemic, it's difficult to hire the right folks, even under normal circumstances, but particularly over Zoom, our spec hasn't changed. It's always first and foremost, low ego, sense of humility. So many people, around us here and in all aspects of med tech have done amazing things. We just like people in our community that don't like to talk about it. So it's all about low ego, high capacity, and sort of a relentlessly sort of fearless, maybe a little bit of the renegade spirit. I think we're still going to need to keep the fight going here.
Just following up on the addition of is it Jean-Olivier Racine, where are you with, you mentioned you have the data that's come in. Are you at a point where you know how it can be applied, or literally is there like a mountain of data sitting there that can be useful and you're trying to figure out the best way to use it? Where are you in that process?
I think our greatest challenge is too many ideas. There are no shortage of inspiration around invention. So probably our greatest challenge right now, and something that JO is leading the charge on, is the down selection and the order of operations. Because in addition to all of the value I think we can deliver to patients and healthcare providers on the clinical side, we also harness a lot of those, the data analytic applications for our own operational efficiency. For example, we have a very large field service organization doing preventive maintenance and responding to any machine issues that may come up. If we can move from what today for medical equipment is kind of react and repair, oh my gosh, something happened, you send the person and then they diagnose it on site. If we can move to predict and prevent and get moved to a place where, and this is our aspiration, it's not true today to be clear, but this is our aspiration, where we have sort of the central command center of thousands of tableaus nationwide, and certain tableaus are lighting up because that they have hit some sort of recombinant algorithm of this is flashing and that's beeping and this is going wrong. I mean, I'm oversimplifying.
Sure.
Then we proactively reach out to the customer and say, hey, we're going to be by to do X, Y, and Z, or it's time for that PM, or hey, you're going to have a filter, you're going to reach a filter saturation point in X number of days, or automated text messages to the biomed and the clinic staff. That's an example of operational efficiency for us that also obviously adds tremendous operating efficiency for the customer as well.
Final question. You're an enterprise solution for dialysis at the moment with Tableau. What can Outset become? Do you have a vision of expanding beyond dialysis, something else in renal? Does your skill set in tech allow you to move into other disease areas? What is their plan? What's the plan for the future?
The plan for the future is first and foremost around really delivering on the vision that we have for the home. I mean, again, the moral center of this company is delivering on what has been a 10-year promise to ourselves to create much better access to home dialysis through something that's a simple, manageable, not intimidating. And also because we've knocked down some of the structural barriers that are standing in its way. And that's a legacy that we still haven't left. And I think we still have a long way to go. And so that's really what keeps me going. And we are far from done. I will tell you that on all fronts. Beyond that, do I see us moving into other clinical areas of medicine? I don't see that for ourselves today, because there is just, number one, so much opportunity in dialysis. We do spend over $80 billion on dialysis every year. There's 85 million treatments per year. I mean, on episodes of care basis, there is scarcely a larger market to be in. And that's just the US. So we have talked publicly about kind of starting to, think about and analyze opportunities outside the United States. But I think we're really pretty committed to this patient population. And I think we have so far to go in order to reach the legacy that we want to leave. It'd be hard for me to imagine us turning our attention to another disease state at this time.
Well, I always enjoy talking to you. And today in particular, this was a great conversation, Leslie. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
So much, Tom. It was really fun.
All right, Chris Newmarker. Well, how can folks find you out there in social media land?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at Newmarker, just like a Newmarker. So yeah, always happy to chat with people. Hear about new cool things going on in the industry.
Excellent. I am also on Twitter at MedTechTom. I'm on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi. Yes, please do connect with us there. Please do tag us when you share this episode on your social media channels. Please do. What am I going to ask them to do, Chris?
Like, follow, subscribe.
There it is. I missed that last week. I quoted you, but it's so much, you just deliver it so much better. Like, follow, subscribe this podcast on any podcast channel, and you won't miss a future episode of this podcast, DeviceTalks Weekly, or our Intuitive Talks podcast, which will be coming out. We'll have a new episode coming out next week, or our newest podcast that we announced last week on the podcast, Striker Talks. So we'll be rolling that out later next
There's
month.
just a ton of cool stuff going on. You got to be there or be square. You got to join in with us. And you know what? We got live events coming in just a few months. I'm so excited.
I know. We will be there in Boston on May 10th and 11th. And as mentioned before, Device Talks Minnesota, June 6th and 7th.
I don't know if I'm right, but I'm just holding on to the hope. We're going to kick Omicron's butt. We're going to do it. We're going to have live events, man. It's going to be awesome.
We are going to do it. All right.
Device Talks is back, baby.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Device Talks Weekly Podcast.
Device Talks is back, baby.